Not sure if their mom's okay with it, but that's okay. Okay. Muslims in the media and Trump supporters. Trump is, in many ways, the most vocal anti-Muslim major leader of any country that has evolved. You know, he says, I think Islam hates us. I think profile is something we have to start thinking about. There's tremendous hatred among Muslims. Would President Donald Trump support a full Muslim database? That is, an FBI base of every Muslim in the country. Very Hitler-esque. So it's certainly something we'd think about, right? So he is at the pinnacle of being anti-Muslim. If you look at who is anti-Muslim, the demographics of anti-Muslims in the US, factor one, Republicans, far and away, have the most negative view of Muslims in the US, by a long shot, on virtually every level. American attitudes, positive, negative, it is Republican, Democrat. If you look at which group most likely connects Islam with violence, again, Republicans. And if you look at which group supports anti-Muslim positions, 51% of Iowa Republicans think Islam should probably be illegal. 70% of Republicans think that some or most American Muslims are anti-American. 78% of Republicans think Islam is incompatible with the American way of life. 65% of Republicans support a ban on all Muslim immigration. 59% of Republicans think that law enforcement should profile Muslims. 60% of Republicans admit to having strong anti-American strong anti-Muslim feelings. And 39% of Americans argue that Muslims should be required a special ID, just like Hitler required the Jews. Okay, so Republicans hold this position. Factor two, education. The less educated that you are, the more you admit to prejudice. So some 45% of people with a high school graduation or less admit to being prejudiced. Well, the more college you have, the less likely you are. Here's another thing that says, do you perceive American Muslims as anti-American? Straight on education. The more educated you are, the less you're likely to see Muslims as negative. Factor three, where you get your news. Basically, if you watch Fox News, you have an anti-Islam view. Now, this is what, if you know your statistics from college, this might be a codependent variable. In other words, Republicans, Fox News tend to go together. Evangelicals, the more evangelical you are, the more you tend to be anti-Muslim. And then finally, knowing Muslims. The less Muslims you know, the more likely you're to have a negative view of them. The more Muslims you know personally, the more likely you're to have a positive view of them. More than all the classes I teach, hanging out with some of our local Muslims is one of the best things to help us understand Islam. Now I bring this up not to denigrate this group, because as you'll see, I think there's a reason why. But who has the most negative view of Muslims? Less educated Republican Fox viewers, white evangelicals who don't know any Muslims. No wonder why they rose up Trump. I mean, this is the embodiment of a Trump voter. Less educated, evangelical Republicans, Fox viewers. Now, what has led to this situation? Is it just the fact that we have a bigoted and discriminatory subsection in America, that we have a basket of deplorables of some size or another? Well, I will say, I think there are some within the Trump coalition who are that. I don't think we can say that there's none of that. There is definitely the KKK wanting to fight Islam. There's the Islam Eagle people. There's definitely that group. But let me suggest that something else is going on. And it has to do with the media. For most Americans, Islam wasn't seen as a positive thing or a negative thing 30 years ago. It just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't a part of people's radar screens. That is, we didn't have strong anti-Muslim feelings in America. We didn't have strong positive feelings either. We just didn't have feeling towards Muslims. They just weren't on people's radar screens. So how did we learn about Islam? Well, for most of us, we learned about it through some extraordinary event in the media that was told to us by the media, 9/11, for example, right? And the media, by its nature, reports on extraordinary, extremes, outlandish things. You don't see stories in the media, 1.5 billion Muslims did not kill anybody today. You hear the one who did. You don't think that 1.5 billion Muslims think Sharia law is about trying to follow God's will in your life. You do have the handful of people holding signs up saying Sharia is about dominating the world. And so, by the nature of our media today, not only do we first hear about Islam through extraordinary and negative things, our media amps them up because they're trying to get attention. Have you ever noticed how it's just breaking news all the time? It's like, it's just constantly breaking news. And if that's annoying you, it's on purpose because that's what breaking news signs are supposed to do. They're supposed to say, oh, maybe this one's serious, right? But it's just breaking news. And what is the breaking news on Islam? Is it ever something positive? Always negative. It's somewhere in the world that the most extraordinarily awful thing happened and it was perpetrated by a Muslim, and I'm going to tell you about it because I know that's going to bring ratings. Right? Yeah. So where do we learn about how Islam operates in the world? Through extraordinarily negative events that are sensationalized for ratings. And you can think about this. When did you first hear about jihad? It was through Osama bin Laden in 9/11. Jihad means to struggle to remain holy. It doesn't have to do with killing innocent people, but that's how we think about it, because how do we learn about it? Through Osama bin Laden. Where'd you hear about fatwa? Fatwa is when the Ayatollah issued a fatwa. It has nothing to do with a death sentence, but that's how we know about it, because that's got associated with the Salman Rushdie affair. How do we learn about Sharia law? It wasn't about trying to follow God's will in your life, which is all Sharia law is. We learn about it because some quacks in Afghanistan want to force people to do some crazy things. Visit, did you turn that off? Oh. Is that on? Okay. Okay. So, now, we learn about things through extremes, right? Now, how did it used to be? Well, let's say I was reading a story and I heard a term, fatwa, Sharia. Well, how did it used to be? I would then go to my World Book Encyclopedia and I would look up what that term means. Now, I tell students this, and I first have to tell them what a World Book Encyclopedia is, because they don't know what a World Book Encyclopedia is. But here's what the interesting thing. If you remember those days, we did not look up Sharia or fatwa. We looked up Islam. And then we found in it where Islam. So what did that make us do? It first made us understand the context. I had to read an entire article about Islam to present the context. Second of all, it was written by an excellent person in the field. This one, this is actually from Britannica, but Anne-Marie Schimmel, she is one of the greatest scholars of Islam in the world. If you read Encyclopedia Britannica, I haven't read it all, but I can tell you just by who wrote it, it's a good article. She's a great scholar. So, notice what we did. We got context and we got credible information. What happens now? We Google. And we don't just Google Islam or violence in context. In fact, when I was looking for example, I started doing violence in, and Google makes suggestions. Islam, the Quran, the very first first thing is violence in Islam. And then what does it take us to? This is actually the results. First one's Wikipedia, which, you know, Wikipedia is Wikipedia. There's good things and bad things about Wikipedia. But the next 4 are all anti-Islam polemical sites. Now, I know them because I know what you do. They don't sound like they are. The religionofpeace.com, that's actually one of the most anti-Islam sites there is in the world. But it doesn't sound like it. But if I'm an everyday consumer of information, how am I supposed to know that that's not true? So what's happened? We now get suggested things that are negative, like we pinpoint into it and we get given bad information. And so it becomes like I had a student come to my office and say, hey, I think you should know that Islam teaches violence and hatred, and the Quran teaches violence and hatred, and the Bible teaches love and forgiveness. And I was like, oh, well, thanks for telling me. That's very useful. I appreciate it. How did you come to that conclusion? He said, I Googled hate in the Quran, love in the Bible. And my cheeky response was, you know, I Googled hate in the Bible and love in the Quran. And funny, it said the opposite thing, you know? But notice how often our questions derive answer. And when we look for information here, we end up finding what we look for, right? Google's pretty good. If we want to find violence in Islam, we'll get a bunch of people telling us about violence in Islam. By the way, if you just search Islam, what comes up suggested by Google? Violence, religion of violence, Islamic State, Islamophobia, right? It's guiding us towards a certain perception. So what happens? Media reports extremes, sensationalizes it for ratings. Well-intentioned people, I'm not saying that these people are not, they're trying to understand it. They go to Google and what do they find? Bad research that supports the sensationalism. This creates an environment of ignorance and fear. The people that are the embodiment of the anti-Islamic Americans, they're not bad people at all. Their fear is derived from the sources that they read, and if I read their sources, I would be scared too. Or I say, if I read only their sources, I'd be scared too. So their fear is legitimate because the system is designed to do that. This then leads to prejudice and discrimination. That's what I think is happening. It's not ill will. Most Americans are not discriminatory, bigotry in their hearts. And what happens is that once you get that, you end up in this negative feedback loop, where once you have a negative view, it just gets stronger and stronger in that sort of way. And the result then is this anti-Islam rhetoric that we see on that side. Good?